Montana Territory, late spring of 1877. The sun had barely risen over the Bitterroot Mountains when the gunshot cracked through the trees. It sent birds scattering from the pine canopy and echoed through the valley like a warning. But it was not a warning, it was a cry for help. Isael Vaughn reined in his horse and turned toward the sound. He had been heading east, planning to meet a cattle drive near Billings by week's end, but instincts built from years in the saddle told him that shot had not come from hunting or target practice. It carried desperation. He nudged his mare down a slope thick with brush and thorns, his rifle slung across his back, eyes sharp. He found her near a creek, half collapsed in the mud, her dress torn at the hem, blood streaking her left arm. A small boy clung to her skirts, no more than 5 or 6, cheeks dirty, eyes wide with fear. "Ma," the boy whispered. Isael dismounted slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "You hurt bad, ma'am." She looked up at him, face pale, stern despite the pain. Her voice was hoarse but firm. "You need to go, leave us be." "I do not ride past folks bleeding by the water," Isael said. "Not how I was raised." "I am not your problem," she said, trying to sit taller but wincing. "Do not waste time on me." He knelt beside her and gently pulled the fabric away from her arm. Bullet grazed, deep but clean. She was lucky. "I have got time to spare," Isael said, already reaching for his saddlebag. She watched him for a beat, suspicious, guarded. "You do not even know my name." "I do not need to know it to help you," he said as he cleaned the wound. "But since you brought it up." Her jaw tightened. "Marabeth Vance." Isael nodded once. "Isael Vaughn and the boy, Ferren," she said, hand resting protectively on her son's shoulder. "Looks like someone tried to run you off the road," Isael said, eyeing the snapped branches and hoof marks nearby. "They were not aiming to scare me." Her gaze dropped to the ground. "They were aiming to kill us." Isael wrapped her arm carefully and tied it off. "Well, they failed." Marabeth looked at him then, long and hard. She had the look of a woman who had been alone too long, had fought through too much already. "Why are you really helping us?" Isael met her eyes. "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago." "And I am here now," she swallowed, eyes glinting. "You are a fool." "Maybe," he said, voice soft, "but I am your fool today." He helped her onto his horse, lifting Ferren to sit in front of her, and walked beside them as they made their way back toward the trail. He could feel her eyes on his back now and then, still unsure, still weighed down by the kind of trust that had gotten her hurt before. They camped that night in a clearing near a quiet stream. Isael built the fire while Ferren curled up beneath his mother's coat, already asleep. Marabeth sat a little distance away, her back against a tree, arms stiff from the wound. "You have a place to go?" Isael asked as he passed her a cup of coffee. She took it, sipped, then nodded. "There is a widow near Fort Benton, old family friend." "We were headed there." "Who was after you?" Marabeth stared into the flames. "My husband died last year, left behind debts he never told me about. Men came to collect. When I could not pay, they came back meaner." His jaw clenched. "They think chasing a woman and her boy through the woods makes them men. They think the law is too far to care." Isael leaned back on his elbows. "Well, lucky for you, I do not care much for what men like that think. You are not alone now." She turned toward him, brow furrowed. "Why do you care?" "I have seen too many good people fall because no one gave a damn," he said. "I made up my mind not to be one of those folks." She looked at him a long while, the firelight dancing in her eyes. There was something breaking loose in her, something old and heavy. But she said nothing more. By morning, her color had returned, and Ferren was full of questions. Isael answered them all with patience, letting the boy ride up front as they headed north. They moved slow, with care, avoiding roads, keeping to the trees. 3 days passed before they reached the widow's homestead. It was a tidy place, with chickens out front and smoke curling from the chimney. The woman welcomed Marabeth with open arms and tears in her eyes. Isael lingered outside, unsure if he should stay. He had done what he set out to do. But as he turned to leave, Marabeth stepped onto the porch. "You leaving?" she asked. "I figured I would give you your peace." "You think helping someone ends at the front gate?" He smiled faintly. "I figured you would want quiet to catch your breath." "You and Ferren." She stepped closer, fingers curling around the porch rail. "You said you had time to spare." "I do." "Then stay." He looked at her, really looked at the woman who had held herself together with threadbare strength, who had not flinched when her whole world tilted sideways. She was still standing. "You sure?" he asked. "I am not the same fool I was a week ago," she said, "but I would be a new kind to let you ride off." He stepped up the porch, just close enough that she had to tilt her chin to meet his eyes. "I will stay as long as you want me," her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then you might be here a long while." "Good," Isael said. "That is exactly what I was hoping." And for the first time since he found her by the creek, she smiled real, wide, and without fear. The wind carried the scent of early lilac through the widow's yard as Isael split kindling beneath the lean-to, sleeves rolled to his elbows, shirt damp with effort. The axe thunked into the block, clean and even. He worked steady, not out of need, but because the rhythm steadied something quiet inside him. Inside the house, floorboards shifted under Marabeth's step. She hadn't spoken much that morning, though her movements were less guarded, her silences less sharp. She had insisted on helping in the kitchen despite the bandaged arm, and now came out with a tin plate of bread and beans. "You ought to eat something before you swing your arms clean off," she said, setting the plate on the bench near him. Isael straightened, brushing wood dust from his palms. "You saying I'm getting ahead of myself?" "I'm saying you don't need to prove anything," she said. "Not to me, anyway." He sat, took the plate without looking at her too long. The warmth between them had shifted, no longer pressed under danger. It moved in slower ways now, familiar glances, shared quiet, the casual trust of being near. "Ferren's chasing the hens," she said after a moment. "Says he's going to train one of them to follow him like a dog." "He's got imagination," Isael said, chewing thoughtfully. "He's always had that," she said, folding her arms. "His father didn't much care for it." Isael looked up. "You did?" "I kept it alive," she said. "Best I could." He set the plate down, appetite fading behind something else. "You do more than keep things alive, Marabeth." Her eyes flicked to his, wary but not cold. "You don't have to say things like that." "I know," he said. "That's why I mean it." She turned away, rubbing her good hand along her skirt. "You ever been married?" "No." "Why not?" Isael leaned back against the post. "Never stayed in one place long enough." "That sounds like a reason," she said. "Not a truth." He watched the trees sway beyond the fence line. "Maybe I didn't think I had anything worth offering." She gave a short breath, almost a laugh. "You're the only man I've met who shows up with nothing and still makes a place feel safe." He looked at her then, really looked. "You think about staying here for good?" "I did once," she said. "Before everything turned. Now I don't know what I think. I only know Ferren deserves something better than running." Isael stood, wiped his hands on his trousers. "He's got that now." She tilted her head. "You don't know that." "I do," he said. "Because I'll make sure of it." She stepped back just a little, as if the weight of those words pressed too close. "You don't owe us that." He didn't move closer. "You told me not to waste time on you. I told you I had time to spare." "That hasn't changed." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but nothing came. Instead, her gaze dropped to the hem of his shirt, where the stitching was frayed and the cloth worn thin. "You ever think about stopping?" she asked. "Not just for a night, for good." "I have," he said, voice low. "But thinking and doing ain't the same." "What would make it the same?" He hesitated, then said, "Someone to stop for." Marabeth didn't answer. The breeze caught her hair, pulling a few strands loose from her braid. Isael didn't reach for her, but the space between them filled with something unspoken and real. That night, Ferren fell asleep under the quilt with a carved wooden horse tucked in his arms. Isael had whittled it by firelight, saying nothing about it, just pressed it into the boy's hand with a nod. Marabeth lingered on the porch after the lamp was turned down. Isael sat beside her, boots resting against the bottom step. She didn't ask him to leave. He didn't ask if he could stay. The stars came out in silence, and she leaned just enough that her shoulder brushed his like it belonged there. Neither of them moved away. A soft rain came the next morning, fine and steady, brushing the dirt yard into darker shades. Isael waited it out beneath the eaves, arms crossed as he watched Ferren kneeling by the coop, murmuring to his chosen hen like it might understand every word. Marabeth stood just inside the doorway, tying her shawl tight across her shoulders. "Widow says there's a man comes by every few weeks," she said, voice low and even. "Trapper, trades pelts and news. She thinks he's due any day." Isael didn't turn. You worried he might bring trouble, not sure what he might bring, but I've gotten careful about strangers. He nodded, reins slipping off the brim of his hat. I'll stay close. You always do. She stepped out, boots crunching wet gravel. That's what's strange. You keep close and you don't ask anything back. Isael let the quiet hang a moment before answering. I don't need much. Marabeth looked over at him, her eyes searching. What did you leave behind? He hesitated, jaw working. A younger brother. He ran south after our father died. Haven't seen him since the war. She waited, saying nothing. I used to ride toward something, Isael added. Now I just ride till I find something worth staying for. And, she asked, voice softer now, he finally turned to her. I think I just did. She didn't flinch. Ferren needs steadiness. I need truth. You sure you've got both? Isael stepped down from the porch, mud tugging at his boots. I can't promise perfect, but I don't leave when it gets hard. She looked at him fully then, her mouth pressed firm, not cold, just weighing. Ferren's been asking if you're kin, she said after a beat. What you tell him? That you're someone who listens when he talks. Isael smiled faintly. That's more than most men get called. Marabeth's hand brushed against her side, fingers twitching like she almost meant to reach for him, then thought better of it. He doesn't trust easy, neither do I. I'm not asking you to, Isael said. I'll earn it. She looked down the path beyond the gate. If that trapper does know something, if word spread about what happened, we might not be left in peace. Then we'll stand ready. We, she asked, testing the word. You, me, the boy, Isael said without pause. That's we enough for me. A flicker moved through her expression, not surprise, not relief, something steadier. You ever teach a child his letters? No, he admitted, but I can teach him to read a trail, measure distance, mark the sun's rise. Then maybe we'll trade lessons, she said. You teach him the land, I'll teach him the page. Isael's eyes warmed. That a proposal? That's a plan, she said, stepping off the porch. One day at a time. The rain eased by late afternoon, and the trapper came just before dusk, riding a dun horse with one eye clouded white. He had a jagged scar across his cheek and a voice like gravel. But he brought no danger, only a sack of dried apples, a stack of old newspapers, and word of a deputy up in Fort Shaw asking after a woman and a child gone missing from a ranch west of Helena. Isael stood beside Marabeth as she listened, arms folded tight, face unreadable. You want me to ride north and nose around? Isael asked when the trapper had gone. Marabeth looked at Ferren, who was drawing in the dirt with a stick. No, let them ask, let them wonder. We're not hiding. We're just living. Isael's mouth twitched into something close to a grin. You sound like someone who means to stay. Marabeth met his gaze. I mean to build, that's not quite the same. He touched her elbow, gentle, brief. Then let's build. And for the first time in days, her hand rose to cover his. Not a reach, not a pull, just a quiet anchor. A wordless answer. The first frost came early that year, silvering the fence posts and curling the last of the garden leaves before dawn. Isael rose before the light, as he always had, and stepped soft across the porch, tugging his coat close against the cold. The earth under his boots was stiff, not yet frozen, but close to it. From the barn came the low shuffle of hooves. He'd been tending the widow's mule and the two goats without being asked. Inside, Marabeth moved quietly through the kitchen, coaxing the stove to life, sleeves rolled past her elbows. She didn't look up when he stepped in, but he could tell from the pace of her hands that she'd heard him. I found the roofline sagging above the pantry, she said. Looks like the beams warped. Isael poured water from the tin kettle into the basin, steam rising. I can set a brace this afternoon. Might have to cut new lengths if the pine's soft. You know what you're doing. I know enough to keep a roof from falling in. She nodded once, then handed him a cloth. You want breakfast before or after you climb up there? He took it, drying his hands slow. Whatever suits you. Suit yourself, she said, but her voice was lighter than it had been in days. Ferren came in from the back room, shirt half-buttoned, hair sticking up like it had fought off sleep and won. He mumbled something about eggs, and Marabeth passed him a bowl, her palm brushing the boy's crown with absent care. Later, while Ferren practiced his letters with the widow inside, Isael climbed the ladder and tested each beam with a measured press of his boot. Marabeth stood below, arms crossed, watching the way he moved, cautious, confident, not wasting motion. "You ever build a house?" she called up. "Not yet." "You ever want to?" He paused, looked down at her through the slats. "I might, depends who's in it." She didn't look away this time. "You trying to say something?" He crouched, resting his weight on the rafter. "I'm saying I'm not here just to pass through." Marabeth stepped closer to the ladder, voice quiet. "You think staying means something easy?" "No," he said. "I think it means something right." She worked her jaw, gaze flicking toward the barn. "I've never had someone offer to stay without needing something back." "I need something," Isael said. "What?" He looked down, steady. "A place to put down what I've carried. A place where someone looks me in the eye and doesn't see a man who's only ever known how to leave." Marabeth took that in without blinking. "You think I've got that in me?" "I think you already gave it," he said. "The moment you asked me to stay." She stepped back from the ladder, quiet for a long stretch. Then she turned and walked toward the shed, her pace slow but sure. Isael didn't follow right away. He stayed where he was, breath clouding in the cold air, fingers curled around the edge of the beam. By the time the sun passed its peak, he had the brace set firm and the roofline level again. Marabeth had brought him a tin of salted venison and cornbread wrapped in cloth, left it at the top of the ladder without a word. He sat on the roof, eating it alone, watching the treetops shift under the wind. That evening, after Ferren had gone to sleep, Marabeth came out onto the porch with a quilt draped over her shoulders. She didn't speak right away, just sat beside Isael on the step. The night was cold enough to bite, but she didn't complain. "You remember that night by the creek," she said, voice low. "I do. I told you not to waste time on me. I said I had time to spare." She looked at him, full and clear. "I didn't believe you then." He met her eyes. "And now?" "I don't think you're here to fix a roof or chase off old debts," she said. "I think you're here because you belong." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Her hand, warm from being tucked beneath the quilt, found his. Not tentative, not unsure, just there. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "I do," Isael replied. "We keep going together." There was no kiss, no sweeping promise, just her head resting against his shoulder, his thumb brushing over the back of her hand, and the sound of branches creaking in the wind. And for both of them, for the boy sleeping warm inside, for the ground they stood on, and the quiet they no longer feared, it was enough. The snow held off longer than expected, but the air turned sharper with each week that passed. Isael cut more wood than the house would likely need, and Marabeth sewed a thicker quilt by the lantern each night, her stitches even, her fingers steady. By late November, word from Fort Shaw came again, this time from a peddler who traded tin and lamp oil in exchange for pelts and dried plum. He spoke of a man shot dead outside Helena, a ranch hand with a reputation for rough debts and rougher hands. The law found no family to claim the body. When Marabeth asked the man's name, he said it without meaning, and she only nodded once, her face unreadable. That evening, Isael found her in the barn, brushing down the mule in silence. "You knew him," he said. She kept her eyes on the brush strokes. "He was one of the last to come calling. I didn't know his name then, just his voice, loud." "Drunk?" Isael said nothing, just leaned against the post and let her speak. "I thought I'd feel relief," she continued, "but mostly I feel nothing, like the part of me that stayed afraid of him already died off months ago." He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "You don't owe that man a single thought." She looked at him then, eyes dry, voice low. "I'm not giving him one, just wanted to be sure the door's shut for good." "It is," Isael said. "You shut it yourself." She set the brush aside, turned to face him fully. "I've been thinking on what you said. About building." His breath clouded between them. "You decide if you're ready. I think I've been ready longer than I let myself believe." Her voice didn't waver. "I want something steady for Ferren, for me. And if you meant what you said, I want it with you." Isael reached for her hand, warm beneath her coat sleeve. "I meant every word. Then I don't see any reason to wait." They married the next Sunday, simple and quiet, under the bare-limbed cottonwoods behind the widow's house. The widow stitched a dress from fabric she'd kept for years, and Ferren wore a too-big vest Isael trimmed down to fit. No preacher came. The widow read the words, and Isael and Marabeth spoke their vows without trembling. Ferren stood between them, solemn as a church bell, and Isael cupped his shoulder when the words were done. Afterward, They shared bread and roasted apples, and Isael carved a ring from bone and brass. He slipped it onto her finger that night as they lay in the stillness of the front room, fire low, sky deep with stars. By spring, Isael had built an addition onto the house, 2 rooms, one for Ferren, and one for a loom Marabeth bartered for with a neighbor. She began weaving again, something she had once done as a girl, long before marriage and loss had narrowed her world. Isael taught Ferren how to mark a trail, how to read the shape of clouds before rain, and how to move quiet through the woods. The boy still talked to the hens, though now he called them by name one day. While Marabeth worked the loom and Isael fixed the latch on the smokehouse, Ferren came running with a pine bough in one hand and his hat clutched in the other. "There's a creek east of the rise and it sings when it moves," he said, breathless. "Can we build a table there sometime, so Ma can sit and listen?" Isael looked at Marabeth, who stood in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame. She smiled and nodded. "Then we'll build it," Isael said. And they did a low table from cedar and stone, just wide enough for 2. They sat there often, hands folded or resting close, the water speaking in its soft voice while the wind stirred the grass. Years passed. The land stayed quiet. Ferren grew tall, his voice deepening by degrees, his hands calloused from fence work and ink both. He learned to read aloud in the evenings, his mother's weaving beside him, Isael's hand steady on the boy's shoulder when he stumbled. No strangers came uninvited. No debts returned. And the house, with its patch of garden and smokehouse and loom room and cedar table, stood through every season. Their days filled with small labors and large joys, plum preserves, traded wool, a new calf born just after midnight. They never spoke again of the trail that brought them together, nor the guns that once chased them. They had no need, because what they had now was a thing they chose day after day. Not just survival, but the slow, quiet joy of building a life brick by honest brick, love by steady hand. And in that far corner of Montana, with the mountains keeping watch and the creek singing just beyond the rise, Isael and Marabeth Vaughn lived the rest of their days in the peace they'd earned, side by side, home at last.